and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. On today's program, death of a Chinese peacekeeper. While participating in a UN mission to Mali, a Chinese national was killed in a mortar attack. 4 other Chinese were also injured. What are China's responsibilities in this region? And making moves in European football, what's driving Chinese tycoons to pour huge sums into overseas soccer teams? To begin our show today, a UN camp has been attacked by extremists, leading to a Chinese peacekeeper. It came only days after 5 UN peacekeepers were killed in an ambush in central Mali, fueling concern over the future of the UN's deadliest active mission. China is condemning the act while promising to contribute more in the peacekeeping effort in the region.
Targeting the UN. An al-Qaeda-related terrorist group launched 2 attacks on 2 UN sites in the town of Gao in northern Mali, killing 4 people overnight. One of those killed was a Chinese UN peacekeeper, and among those seriously injured were 4 other Chinese troops.
It's scary because one vehicle got in here. They keep saying there is security here, but we can't understand how a suicide bomber can get this close to the camp without being stopped. So yes, we're scared.
Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, or AQIM, on Wednesday claimed responsibility for the attacks on the multi-dimensional interstabilization mission in Mali, or MINUSMA. Mali's north has seen continuous violence since it fell under the control of Tuareg-led rebels who allied with jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda in 2012. At least 65 peacekeepers with MINUSMA have been killed while on active service in almost 3 years.
They're trying to capitalize on the fact that the peace process is not moving forward as it should, trying to torpedo this process and any hope that the population will support this process.
China has always been of troops, police, and military experts to UN peacekeeping missions. There are currently more than 2,400 Chinese peacekeepers in 7 African mission regions, including Mali.
It is an intolerable serious crime. China strongly condemns the attack, and we request that the Malian government and the UN instantly launch an investigation on this terrorist attack, bring the murderers to justice, and work in close cooperation with the Chinese government for its aftermath management.
The UN calls for increasing the maximum number of UN soldiers in Mali by 2,049 personnel, which would raise the force's authorized strength to 13,289. China said it will continue to actively participate in the UN peacekeeping missions and contribute more to Africa's peace and stability.
For more on this issue, we are joined here in the Beijing studio, Mr. Teng Jianqun, Director of the Centers for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation at China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir, for being with us. Also joining us from Washington, D.C., inside the United States, we're having Mr. David Gartenstein-Ross, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and also Professor at Georgetown University's Security Studies Program. Welcome as well, Professor. Meanwhile, joining us from Nairobi, we are having Dr. Ali Mustafa, who is the Secretary General of the Global Networks of Religion for Children. Is a peace and reconciliation expert specializing in sub-Saharan Africa. Welcome to the 3 of you, gentlemen. One of the things, Mr. Tang, the shock of the news is being felt by all people here all over China. That China was contributing a lot more than it used to be to peacekeeping forces all over the world, and yet this is one of the biggest fatal attack.
Yeah, I think this is a fatal attack on the military. Also, China suffered, the attack in Haiti years ago. A policeman died during the attack, and this time, I think just to show the commitment and the responsibility of China to, maintain the peace and the stability in Africa. As mentioned last September in the UN Security Council, President Xi Jinping also mentioned China is going to establish 8,000 personnel to maintain the peace and the stability in Africa.
Okay. Dr. Mustafa, we understand, according to the UN rules, the country in which the peacekeepers are operating should be responsible for the safety and security of these peacekeepers. Of course, we also understand it is very hard for these countries to function that way because, after all, that is the reason why the peacekeepers are there. And sometimes peacekeepers cannot work with the governments because that means taking sides in the political crisis in those countries. So, under such circumstances, looking at the case involving the death of a Chinese peacekeeper, what can be some of the possible ways to take care of these peacekeepers, particularly in Mali, a country like that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. These groups that have been attacking UN peacekeepers, have been attacking soldiers and government forces, they have no regard for authorities. They have no regard for anybody. And anyone who goes there, irrespective of whether they are peacekeepers or going there to enforce laws, keep the peace that is there or not there at all, they consider anyone not on their side to be their enemy. And this is why they are fighting and have been attacking the UN peacekeepers, unfortunately. And I don't see these kind of groups, particularly the Al-Qaeda, Al-Murabitun, the movement for oneness and jihad in West Africa. They are still going to target United Nations peacekeepers and government forces in that area because they have no regard for law whatsoever.
Therefore, let me come back to you, Mr. Tang. What can China do? Now we understand an investigation team has already been sent out by the Chinese president to the country of Mali to take a look at the situation, also help the UN and the local government to do the investigation. But what can China do? Is China going to retaliate?
No, I don't think China can do it that way because the peacekeepers only have light weapon systems, no artillery, no aircraft carrier or something like that, and this is only for the peacekeeping. This is not peacemaking. There is a big difference between the peacekeeping and the peacemaking. And if peacemaking, you can carry out some big operation against the groups or extremists. This time, the peacekeepers only following the UN cross, and then also to maintain the separation of the different groups in that region. So
right.
I think the peacekeeper is only some.
They could only fight
soldier.
back when they are being
Yeah.
attacked.
Yeah. So they have no such retaliatory means.
Mr. Gartenstein-Ross, Professor, then are the peacekeepers now in some of the African countries, such as Mali, the most vulnerable targets for extremists and also for Al-Qaeda related branches, such as this one?
No, I mean, they're clearly not the most vulnerable targets. If you look at jihadist targeting, they've gone after targets that are much, much softer than peacekeepers. They've gone after villages, they've gone after people who are in houses of worship where there's large crowds around. They've gone after schoolgirls. Probably the peacekeepers are a softer target and a more vulnerable target than some of the luxury hotels that jihadists have gone after. But the bottom line is that they do have defenses. They are able to actually fire back when they're attacked. They're vulnerable, but not the most vulnerable.
But on the other hand, Professor Gartenstein-Ross, when you have a national from China shot dead, killed by these terrorists, it is very crucial that countries are reacting. In what way, of course, it should be discussed, but it's very important that countries are reacting. Otherwise, it means further invitation of the extremists or the terrorists for further attacks against the peacekeepers, particularly UN peacekeepers. So what can the international community do?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Look, I think that the response to any one attack, it's a little bit difficult. To look at another thing that really caused international shockwaves several years ago, in the same region, in Nigeria, you had the Chibok schoolgirls who were taken. Now, ultimately, after that, and it wasn't just because of the schoolgirls being captured by Boko Haram, but you have nations of the militaries of 4 different nations going after that organization, and it significantly lost power. Now, in the case of peacekeepers being attacked, one thing that I think will be discussed in the future is the rules of engagement. Peacekeepers are increasingly in conflict zones that are different than what the UN mandate anticipates. Peacekeeping is often thought of as keeping peace between 2 countries or keeping peace in a civil war situation. It doesn't anticipate as much peacekeepers being targeted by terrorist organizations. And that's something that they'll need to think about from a rules of engagement perspective.
Dr. Teng, is that a consideration that we should really put a lot of efforts into, which is the nature of peacekeeping compared to what it used to be? And under such circumstances, what new policies or what new preventive methods should be done?
Actually, if we look at peacekeeping activities by UN, which started from 1948, and millions of officers and soldiers participated in such activities. So I think that for the Chinese part, I don't think China will do by itself, for the sake of China. It's actually assignment from the UN Security Council. So I think China will abide by the all the regulations and all the arrangement by the UN.
But the question is whether the UN's previous mechanism, let's say preventive methods to prevent the peacekeepers from being attacked, and also the locations in which peacekeepers should be and can be sent to, and also the UN peacekeepers' specific ways of protecting themselves and their relations with different parties in crisis, should all these be re-examined? Mr. Garston Rouse.
I think the answer is yes. It should be re-examined. Look, not that it should necessarily be changed, because when you change the rules of engagement, there's a risk of changing the mission itself. You want peacekeepers to be peacekeepers, not to be combatant forces or occupying forces. And so the mandate as it's structured makes logical sense, that it makes the peacekeepers there to keep the peace, not to take a side in a conflict. The question arises, as Dr. Mustafa pointed out, sometimes they're keeping peace when there's a party that's not going to abide by any rules of international law or rules of armed conflict, and instead is going to view the peacekeepers as an obstacle to their own dominance of a region, and thus attack the peacekeepers. When that happens, does their mandate make sense? And I think that while there's a logic to the mandate, I think that increasingly in the 21st century, we'll find that it's a mandate that's not best suited to the environments they'll be in. So I think that discussion of change should be undertaken, bearing in mind that any sort of changes that we make will also bear their own sets of problems and difficulty.
That's very true. Dr. Mustafa, let me come back to you. Terrorist groups has not necessarily been the major elements being considered by peacekeeping, at least in the previous days and also years. And now it has become such an important phenomenon for international security. And therefore, what would be the role of peacekeeping when dealing with or when preventing terrorists from attacking both the civilians and also the peacekeepers? It's a big question mark. Has the UN and can the UN and international system be able to work that out within a period of time so that the peacekeepers could be safe? Dr. Mustafa. It seems that we have some problems connecting to Dr. Mustafa in Africa, but let me come back to you, Mr. Teng. What do you make of that question?
Yeah, this is really a dilemma for the peacekeeping activities of the UN. For example, in the past decade, at least 3,400 peacekeepers killed during the activities, during the operations. So how can have a safe environment for the peacekeepers? This is a very tough job for not only for the peacekeepers, but also for the UN at least. You have a lot of assignments, at least at this moment, all over the world. But on the other side, how can give a safe environment and give a safe protection, including the self-defense capability, not only a light weapon system. This is actually a very challengeable task, assignment for the peacekeepers and also for UN.
Certainly, it is a new question for the United Nations. It is also a big question for China, which has been contributing.
Especially
now.
The terrorist group, have already become the main, challenge for the peacekeeping activities in some countries.
Yes, indeed. When talk about China's efforts for peacekeeping, we have seen China in recent years become a major contributor of troops, police, and military experts to UN peacekeeping missions. According to UN statistics, China now has more than 3,000 personnel currently in the field, the most of the UN P5 or permanent 5 nations. At least 15 have been killed on different missions. 2015, for example, China put 8,000 troops for the UN peacekeeping standby forces, and China is set to contribute more than 10% of the UN peacekeeping budget from the year 2016 to 2018, making it the second largest financial contributor after the United States to the UN peacekeeping. As China becomes more deeply involved with UN operations, of course, many questions that China are concerned about when it comes to its UN peacekeeping personnel. Mr. Garstein-Ross, even though the United States is contributing the biggest amount of financial support to UN peacekeepings, the number of peacekeepers from U.S. are few, and yet the question is, how can the permanent 5, together with the Security Council now, with increasing number of the attacks against peacekeepers, be able to figure out a solution? I understand what you talk about, Mr. Garstein-Ross, that it's important not to change the mandate. At least we are very sure about it, but it is also very important that we are coming up with some timely plan.
Right. Look, I actually didn't say that we shouldn't change the mandate. I do think the mandate should change. All I was saying is that just as there's cost to having the mandate as it is now, there's cost to changing it. I think those costs are worth it. But the thing that we need to think through is, how do you change the mandate while not changing the role of UN peacekeepers into an occupying force rather than a peacekeeping force? That's a difficulty, but I don't think the mandate as it's currently put together is appropriate for the situation in which peacekeepers find themselves.
Right.
The reason why peacekeepers are used so much, the reason why China is so active in supporting peacekeeping missions is because China has commercial interests all over the world. It understands that stability is beneficial to China just as it's beneficial to countries of the region, just as it's beneficial to the United States. And so both countries are believers in the peacekeeping mission. Now, we increasingly have states that are challenged by internal difficulties, multiple kinds of instability, multiple kinds of armed factions. And it's a problem that we're going to be dealing with for decades to come. So supporting ways to make governance better is important for both countries, but we're going to have to think through how to make peacekeeping work for the challenges that we face in the 21st century.
On the other hand, Dr. Mustafa, I hope now you could hear me. Can you?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. The question for you is, since you are coming from Africa, many of these fatal cases of peacekeeping are in crisis countries in Africa. But the question is, when you have the peacekeepers in those countries, it could bring certain kind of hope of making the situation at least temporarily stable. However, if fatal attacks like these continue to rise, it could be possible that the peacekeepers are leaving because the UN has also to take care of the security of those peacekeepers as well. So the question is, can capitals of African countries and also regional countries in Africa be able to also support the work of the UN peacekeeping missions?
Please repeat the question again. I didn't get it clearly.
If I could just sum it up, can African countries themselves also be more responsible for the security and safety of peacekeepers from all over the world there to help African countries?
Yeah, you know, overall, the way this war on terror has been fought and prosecuted around the world, it seems to most of us that it's been counterproductive. And we're focusing on we are only attacking and, you know, all the time being offensive. We are not focusing on what needs to be done at the community level. What do we do with the communities that are neglected? And in this case, in Mali, you know, the regime of Muammar Gaddafi was taken out at the behest of Security Council Resolution 1973. People didn't care what was going to happen to the militias that Muammar Gaddafi was controlling, and these guys just went down south, the Sahel, with the weapons that they had and ammunition that they had, and they created chaos in parts of Sahel, Mali, and other places there. And this is something that governments, the United Nations, have got to look at and address, while at the same time look at the communities that are neglected, which then welcomes these groups.
Well, I guess there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and also a lot of shared responsibilities as well. Not only just the peacekeepers themselves, but also many others that are in the region and also in the neighborhood. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Teng Jianqun, David Garterstein-Ross, and Ali Mustafa. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Unprecedented Chinese investment in European football. As China works to develop its own sports industry, how will overseas investment play a role? Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. In recent years, many Chinese firms have begun investing in football clubs in Britain, Spain, France, and other European countries. This is seen as a way of developing China's own soccer industry as the country aims to become a soccer powerhouse. Before we start our discussion about this, let's take a look at this background story.
The world's second largest economy has never been known for its football, qualifying for just one World Cup. But over the past couple of years, Chinese investors have been acquiring major stakes in football clubs in European countries. English Premier League club Manchester City sold a 13% stake to a Chinese consortium consisting of China Media Capital and CITIC Capital. Rostar Group bought a 50% stake in Spanish soccer club Espanyol. Wanda Group paid $52 million for a 20% stake in La Liga football club Atletico Madrid. And China Energy Company Limited bought roughly 60% of the Czech club Slavia Prague. For Wang Jianling, chairman of the Wanda Group, the motivation is to provide more opportunities for young men to train in Europe.
If I have stakes in 3 football clubs in Europe, then Chinese young people can get more training opportunities there. Atletico Madrid organizes 2 cups annually and invites young men in the same age group from all over the world, so Chinese young people will also be able to participate.
Some say that the investments will also encourage more Chinese to follow the sport, driving the development of China's own industry. Earlier this year, China carried out an ambitious blueprint to boost the sport, with the broader objective of becoming a world soccer superpower by 2050. China aims to have a domestic sports industry worth $850 billion by 2025. According to a veteran player, younger generations is key for football development.
2002 is the peak for China's football. The gap between us and South Korea, Japan back then was very close. But since then, we've found the gap growing larger and larger. The key reason is the training and cultivation of young players.
Now, observers say new strategies are necessary.
We should forget what we had before and start from zero.
It will be an undeniably challenging route to success, and may be a long while before China's national team begins to show any progress on the global stage. But Chinese investors hope their contributions will assist that process.
For more on the Chinese investment in European soccer, I'm joined here in the Beijing studio by 2 guests, Mr. Robin Simons, Chairman of China club football. Welcome to our program. I wonder when the Chinese investment is going into your club as well.
Well, that's what we're still looking for. We're hoping that will happen.
All right, I'm Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics. Joining us, Liu, glad to have you. So, what is it? I have to get your answers directly that the Chinese business people are looking at when they are throwing huge sums of money into the European club footballs. Is it the money, the profits they're looking at, the prestige, or getting a training ground for the Chinese players, or just being patriotic? I mean, what exactly is it, Professor Liu? Probably you have a better understanding.
You covered most of the answers.
All right, what are the rest?
Well, I think number one, yes, to answer the Chinese political call, because the Chairman Xi Jinping, and for a number of times, they proposed that the three-stage China soccer dream. You know, for the first stage, we need to qualify for the World Cup, and for the second stage, we need to host the World Cup, and in the end, we win out the World Cup.
I can tell you're a soccer fan. You can remember those stages very well. But what exactly do you think the business people are looking at? Is it real business that we're talking about?
Well, I think number one, they have the and it's like 10 years ago, simply to be a member in the golf club. You know, you feel prestigious, but right now you own a club. You own the crown of the sports. So that's something they are looking for. So number two is the try to synergize the sports business together with the business, because many of those companies, they are pushing forward for their market expansion in the countries that they own a club. So like the one company like the Lotus, they are really investing into the stadium by selling the lighting equipment in those stadiums.
Okay.
And so the Alibaba e-commerce is spreading all over, and because they also see the big market in those sports fans. So by leveraging both the global team and also the Chinese sports fans, they can really build a loyalty and dynamism.
Well, Mr. Rowan, let me ask you, I'd like you to be silent over there. Will the wish, as being mentioned by Professor Liu, from these Chinese business people, when they try to make an investment, huge investment into the football clubs inside Europe, be able to win them the rewards as they wish?
Well, I think the main rewards, I think ego is definitely part of it, like the major investors from other parts of the world into European football. But in China at the moment we have a conflagration of not just of a business opportunity in a time when billionaires are looking for that ego trip, but also a very strong political support for the sport of football. And these two coming together is what has unleashed this sort of craze of football investment.
But there has been a lot of jokes about investments when you do it about the sports industry. And the jokes coming from Europe, as some term it, is the safest way to lose money in a gradual and sometimes in a sudden way is to invest in a football club. Of course, that is only a joke, as they say, but it also indicates the kind of danger of investment involved in this specific industry.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, traditionally it's been very hard to make money out of football clubs, but we're seeing an investment now which is going much wider than just the clubs.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we're seeing Chinese acquisitions of some of the rights holders of the football leagues, and they're looking at the management companies that look after the players in the game. And so it's a much wider play, but I think with the same ultimate aims, which is to get themselves into the system and the environment and the elite, rather sort of rarefied atmosphere of global football. And all these ways are now being taken, none of which are actually helping Chinese football directly.
Yeah, I think the point you raise is pretty much echoed by Mr. Wang Jianling, who is also an aggressive acquirer of those football teams. He said if you make money out of investing into soccer teams, either your brain goes wrong or you're a crook. So I think he's pretty much there with the business sense. But he also said if you're able to integrate this into a larger business portfolio, so that through the drawing attention, through building the loyalty among the customers that you are able to turn on the investment from other businesses. So I think that's the way people move forward with this sort of investment.
Before we go to about whether it could help the Chinese soccer industry, let me ask you, can you really buy into a mechanism, buy your way into the system, and become a important player just overnight because of the investment?
Yes, you can, and you can do that at the very highest levels of the global game, and this is exactly what we're seeing.
It's a shortcut.
It's a shortcut. It's an easy cash solution, if you have the cash, to buy into exactly that elite pyramid of top professional football.
Cash is not something that China is short of at this moment, at least. However, what about the skills? What about the plans to update the Chinese soccer? What about the best players, how to cultivate them? What about how to send the Chinese players overseas to get the best training and let them to see what is the world level of soccer? Those are the questions. Investment is expected to help upgrade the Chinese football industry. Sports agencies are also seen as critical to vitalizing a commercialized football economy. It's also believed to yield the easiest profits. Just take a look at the agent fees paid by UK clubs. Look over there. Wow, quite a huge number over there. But such mechanisms are still new to Chinese football. So the question is, can China, with these huge sums of investment, and some of the pioneers from the business community getting into the circle of this high-tier soccer clubs, be able to help its level or upgrade its level of soccer?
I think it's extremely hard. It's easy to buy into these things, but the reason they have big value in Europe is because they represent industries that have built over 100 years. China needs its own football culture before those cultural industries can grow on them. And we're not yet seeing the same levels of investment going into the grassroots game here, to the kids game in China. So without a huge number of people who are deeply passionate and emotional about the game and willing to consume the game themselves in their own lives, all of the knowledge that we have about how Europe works from these acquisitions isn't actually going to help. We still need the same thing, that China needs to become a grassroots football nation in its own right, and people have the ethical and moral understanding of what it is to participate in this game.
So what many would wonder, Professor Liu, of course you are not a soccer expert, but let me just ask you from an investment sense, if the purpose of the investment is, at least part of it, for upgrading China's soccer participation worldwide, can those, at least part of those huge sums of cash being put into grassroots soccer cultivations or educations in China, so that maybe we'll have a more direct solution to a higher level of soccer, more stadiums, more availability to the children during the sports classes in the middle school and also in the primary schools, and many other areas to encourage kids to play soccer.
That's right. I think those investors have also been claiming that they are doing more of philanthropy work by investing overseas, buying those teams, eventually the growth of the Chinese sports industry, and also to train those kids. And some of them also gave some quotas to train the Chinese kids within those teams, and using their facilities. But they manifestly said very clear that well, we train those kids just for the sake of selling them to those football teams. So therefore, I think our colleague here is doing the right job, really, to do popular education, so you can buy the best horse in the world to run and to win the champion. But how to really train your own kids to really grow in their constitution, to grow in their courage and in their sports skills. So that's they are not really closely correlated.
Okay, those are of course interesting questions. We're also now joined by a expert on soccer coming from Europe. In Lisbon, we are having Mr. Luis Aguila, who is a journalist and author of many books covering world soccer. Mr. Aguila, finally, great to have you. Your comments about the Chinese heavy investment, financially, commercially, into European soccer clubs, briefly from you.
Well, it is a normal investment. Right now, the Chinese are doing this. Before, people from Emirates do the same with Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain. Also, the Glazer brothers from USA bought Manchester United. So, if you think in the plan of investments, it's a smart choice. I give you an example. The actual owner of Leicester City, a Taiwan businessman, bought the club in 2010 for £36 million, and 6 years later, right now, the club have a value of £400 million. So this is a smart investment. For other ends, there is another kind of investment in teams of lower league divisions that is happening now in Portugal. In Portugal, there are 10 or 12 teams from lower league divisions that have Chinese owners, and these ones are paying the club to put the Chinese players there so they can learn and they can evolve. And this is possible to do in lower league divisions because Chinese players go there. These clubs are almost bankrupted. They are passing through enormous financial crisis. So if a businessman from China go there and say, we need to pay this football club, but you have to put in the first team 2 or 3 Chinese players, they will accept. They will accept everything. It's very different when we are talking about strong teams like United, like City, like Chelsea, like Real Madrid or Barcelona. This is impossible to do right now. You don't have a single Chinese player right now that have quality to be in the best 50 or 60 teams in the world, to be there, not playing in the 11. Maybe in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, who knows? Maybe that will happen. But these are two separate kinds of investments.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Aguila, may I ask you just a follow-up question? I know you have been deeply involved with many of the European football clubs owners. What is it that the Chinese and some of the foreign investors are coming in heavily for these clubs? Are Europeans feeling losing their faith? Will there be future political obstacles for them to keep their investment to a certain proportion once the economies are getting better? Briefly from you.
I'm sorry. You were asking me if there will be political obstacles for Chinese investors came to Europe and buy football teams here? Was that?
Not only investors, but also international investors in the long term.
No problem at all. Roman Abramovich was the first one to buy a football club in England, Chelsea, in 2004. At the time, there was a few obstacles, media obstacles, social obstacles. But after a while, Chelsea starts to play, starts to win, and the supporters were all thankful to have someone like Roman Abramovich that invested in the first years something like 300 million euros in new players. So if the teams will win, there is no problem. Supporters don't care if the owners come from China or from Russia or from Saudi Arabia. If they are losing, that is another question.
Of course, it's another question, Mr. Simons. Of course, nobody can win all the time. So what about you? What do you make of Mr. Aguila's comments?
Well, you know, Leicester City is a great example to use, isn't it? The 5,000 to 1 dream that can never be repeated. And I think a lot of these investors feel that they can also win that dream. That is very, very unlikely. Much more common is the Abramovich model. And yes, they have won trophies, but that's not a sound business investment. There's over £1 billion, I think, being spent on achieving that success. So I don't see directly in the clubs that it's very easy to make a profit. I think it can be easier in some of the rights agencies and some of the middle companies there. But again, none of these things will really be pushing forward Chinese football. We need to come back to China to do that and to put some of this big investment back into the local game. Just if I can make one more point, Portugal is a great example, isn't it? We've seen investors from all over the world invest into European football, but we have yet to see any other country suggest something like positive discrimination for Chinese players in lower divisions. Nowhere in the world of football do we have this type of situation where standards are lowered to make it possible for players from one nation to take part.
Professor Liu, before we go, final words from you. Sound investment really going to be for China's future of football?
If you really want to invest into the Chinese future football, invest into Chinese kids.
All right. Well, from a cash cow to a talent cow, that is so far away that we're talking about. But at least let's make some efforts. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us and being always passionate about Chinese soccer. Rowan Simons, Professor Liu Baocheng, and Luisa Aguila. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. All the best. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.